here. All right. Musicians, have you ever wondered if it was possible to sell more music, merchandise, or tickets, or whatever it is you're trying to sell just by using better words, by learning how to write better with your emails, your ads, or even your website? Well, that's the power of an underground skill that few people know, but once truly mastered, can literally change the trajectory of your music business. Today's guest is someone whose work has influenced some of the best marketers in the world using this underground skill of copywriting, otherwise known as salesmanship in print. So if you've ever heard the phrase the most ripped off copywriter in history, you'll know that we're talking about John Carlton. He's crafted some of the most profitable direct response ads ever written. But here's the thing, the same principles that sell those products are the same principles that you can use to sell your music, your merchandise, and you as an artist. So today we're going to be diving deep into the psychology of fan engagement, copywriting that sells, rebel marketing strategies that actually work. So if you guys are ready to learn some amazing stuff, stay locked in. And John, welcome to the show.
Hi Dax, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, man. I'm happy to be chatting with you today. And one thing that I don't think many of our musician audiences appreciate is that you are a musician yourself. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I am.
So I'm a guitar player. And so when I heard that you play guitar as well, I was very curious. So how long have you been playing guitar, John?
Well, saw the Beatles when I was 12. I think I just turned 12. They were in January or February of 1964. So saw them. I was in sixth grade, I think. Anyway, so I had a friend nearby who was my entire generation like went nuts when they saw the Beatles. It was like it opened up a whole new category of ways to live and things that are exciting and pleasurable. I had a friend who was an accordion player, and he switched over to organ, the Vox Continental, actually. And he told me, he says, you need to go take lessons and get your dad to rent you a guitar so you can do that. And I said, okay. I was, I think one of the keys to my success as a writer, as a businessman, as a lot of things, is that I realized I'm an experiential kind of guy. I lived to experience things. I liked reading about things. I was a voracious reader, but I was also into the experience of things. So just the idea of being in a band and presenting yourself and playing music to people who would then dance and do things that I wanted to go do that. So within a year or so, I was in a band playing for junior highs and high schools and played throughout high school and was in bands. And, we weren't old enough to play in bars yet or do anything else. So we just played for dances and it was just great. And we weren't exceptionally good. I certainly never, we never got to the quality of, of the Beatles or any of the other bands that we loved. But it didn't matter. We knew how to keep a beat. We found a drummer that could keep the beat, a bass player who could stay in the pocket, and me as a guitarist, and my friend Bob, who was a more advanced guitarist than I was. So we just went for it. And it was an amazing way to spend my youth. And just as an aside, I played throughout college and then kind of put it aside and played open mic nights and things, but didn't really get involved in bands until my fifth midlife crisis, which happened in my 40s, where I formed a three-piece rock and roll trio and played all the biker bars in northern Nevada where I had moved. And did that for about a year and then continued to sit in with other bands for another 5 years or so, just as a weekend thing. And that was my musical thing. Now I play with old college pals. We get together and play once in a while, but I do play guitar every day and had a collection which I'm divesting myself of. And I don't think there's never been a more rewarding part of my life than being involved in music. It's a different language. I'm self-taught. I can't read music. Don't need to with rock and roll and things like that. So written a ton of songs, done some recording, met some amazing people, met some freaking idiots. and just the gamut that of life, of huge chunks of life you can bite off and chew thoroughly through music is amazing. It's something we all share. It's part of the collective unconscious. And as a writer, I don't think there's a better side gig to have. Stephen King and his buddies, I can't think of their names right now. They formed the Remainders. I don't know if you know about this. It's a band that expands and contracts, but they're all professional writers. So a lot of them are in fiction, some of them are in advertising, and they're horrible. But they get people like Keith Richards to sit in, and it's an amazing thing. I think it's still going. It was going on a lot in the 90s and the early aughts. So and the writers all said the same thing. I will never be a great musician, but I will never put down the axe either. So that's something
Absolutely.
to think about.
That's really cool, John. I appreciate you kind of going into history on that. And so I'm curious personally, what's the main axe that you're playing right now?
Well, I have three that I play mostly, and the one I play the most is the one sitting on my couch after the wife goes to bed. I usually pull that and just doodle, excuse me, while I'm watching a Warriors basketball game or something.
Oh, there you go.
And that's a Martin Traveler, um, uh, short, small guitar, nice little neck. As my arthritis advances my hands, I appreciate the small neck.
Yeah.
And then I have a Martin Dreadnought back in my man cave, and a converted PV telly that a friend of mine converted into to sound much like a Strat.
Oh, nice.
So I dink around with that. And then I have a Gretsch Beast, which is it's a nasty instrument. It's made from the worst wood Gretsch could find back in the mid 80s, no, the late 70s. And the action's really high, but I use it for slide. So that the Gretsch Beast I have tuned to G, and that's my go-to slide guitar. So that's about it. What are you playing?
I'm mostly a Paul Reed Smith guy. I love Paul Reed Smiths. I have since I was younger, and so my main axes that I use are the single cut 245s.
Uh-huh.
I love those. Those are perfect. I have smaller hands too. I've got clown shoes, but it's tiny hands. I don't know how that worked out. I see these guitar players with these giant hands, and I'm just like, why? But I like the smaller scale lengths just because it helps me play the chords that I want to play and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, Paul Reed Smith is sort of my main go-to. I play on some baritones as well. We play some, down tune hard rock, borderline metal stuff. So you got to down tune every now and then. Gotta
Okay.
gotta get. It's probably a little aggressive for your taste. I
You
assume.
down 2.5 or a full step?
Uh,
More than one?
yeah, we're in. It's basically the equivalent of C standard, but then
Oh
you
my
drop
God.
the E string to match the the D string. So drop B flat technically.
Hmm.
Sounds nice and chunky and bluesy. It's a heavy kind of blues when you do it right. No, um,
Are you able to use heavier strings and get that thud going then? Yeah.
yeah. I use probably 12 to 58 on my low tune ones. Not quite Stevie Ray Vaughan, thickness, but working on it, working on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Interesting.
I'm a huge blues guy. Like I come from rock and metal. I grew up listening to like Metallica and stuff like that. But uh, I really cut my teeth on guitar with the blues guys and learning how to just improvise over scales and stuff. So I love trying to bring that over into the hard rock sphere. That's where my main interest kind of lies with my own band and stuff like that. But John, I'm super curious, man. Like being a musician, we have a certain sort of life archetype, you could call it. Growing up, people are always kind of labeling us the slackers and the outcasts and these kind of things. And I've heard you use that label to describe yourself as being a slacker. But there was a moment around when you hit 30 years old or so that you discovered copywriting. Can you talk about really what was the thing that lit a fire under your ass, so to speak, to go from kind of being in this certain state to really making a radical shift in your life?
Yeah, this was part of my standard speech when I was on the speech circuit or on the global speech circuit. I would have to explain why anyone should listen to me, why anyone in the audience should pay attention to what I was talking about. And I was 32. And actually, when I was 31, 32, I lost my job, my girlfriend, my place to live, and I lived out of my car for about 6 months. Actually, I went up and down the the west coast of the United States and slept on couches a lot and slept out in the on beaches and just kind of ruefully going over my life because I was in my 30s. I hadn't gotten anything done. I I was cursed with having a lot of promise with some talent. I was the cartoonist for my high school and college newspapers, and uh, English teachers always marveled at my love of writing and my ability to write at a slightly higher level than I was. Uh, and n Nothing had come to fruition. I'd lost my job, but it didn't matter. I'd been a one-man art department. I was kind of dabbling in a little bit of writing, but really what happened was I I I read Think and Grow Rich and started getting into a lot of self-help stuff. And I realized no one was going to save me. There was no one going to come along and say, John, why don't you do this, this, and this? And I realized if anybody was going to intervene in my collapsing adult life, it was going to be me. It was going to have to be me. So I had never met a freelance writer, but I had met some copywriters while I was working as a paste up artist and graphic designer in some art departments up in Palo Alto and then again down in Long Beach. And I just decided, what the hell? I got nothing really left to lose. So I had like a month's rent paid on my uh, dingy little apartment in Redondo Beach, and enough gas to get around. I had a little bit of money, and I went. And I went out there, and I hope I realized there was this amazing hunger for people to take on the writing that needed doing in the marketing and advertising world. And I got some gigs, and through a series, I won't bore everyone with this, but through a series of blunders on my part, I kept offering to do the jobs overnight when they would have given me 2 weeks. So I got a name for myself around Los Angeles, and then I started meeting people and realizing what I was doing and taking the 2 weeks. But yeah, I started getting a reputation really fast because it wasn't that hard once I understood the secrets. And the secrets all came to me from John Capel's um, How to Write a Good Advertisement, I think was his book, or that was Schwab, I think. Anyway, there were a couple of guys I learned through the books, older stuff like the old 40s guys in the Mad Madison Avenue guys, the guys even older than that. I came across Claude Hopkins, who wrote in the 20s about advertising. I don't know if your people are familiar with this stuff,
I am big.
but yeah, but I got steeped in the history of advertising, and I actually went to the library and I read everything in I think it was the 600 to 700 series, which was salesmanship, copywriting, marketing, things like that. I just started speed reading these books and going through things, figuring I needed to do that to get even my toe in the door at the agencies that I wanted to do freelance writing for. And what I realized after my second or third job was that that little couple of months of speed reading through books and learning a lot of things and deep reading books like Claude Hopkins, My Life in Advertising and Scientific Advertising, and certainly the John Caples books, put me light years ahead of most of the writers in even the top agencies down there. And that was because everybody was slacking off. Usually, a writer in an agency will have one mentor, kind of a mentor. He'll get hired, they'll start doing stuff, and as soon as they write a slogan and it gets published, then they consider themselves a copywriter and they figure they don't need to learn anything else. That's a flaw in the human system, and it's not just copyright, it's everything. And you think you're good at this, so you'd be good at everything you try, and you're just an awesome human being. And so that channeled me back to direct response advertising and marketing, which is a small subsection of the huge marketing and advertising world. In the large advertising world, people think you can sing a song and do a little slogan and that will sell stuff, and you don't tell them where to go or where to buy it. And people think, well, it works for Coca-Cola. And it's like, yes, because Coca-Cola put a century of advertising and billions of dollars into the marketing. If you have a century to wait and you have billions of dollars, you can advertise like Coca-Cola. But for the people who need to sell now, you need to use real salesmanship. And that's the stuff that comes from door-to-door salesmen back in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. And then there's still a few now. But the kind of salesmanship where you have to ascertain what kind of prospect you're talking to, figure out what their needs are, figure out a pitch that will attract them to what you have, and then sell them what you have, and hopefully make their lives better. And that's a different kind of advertising. Like I say, a very small niche of it. And I just got fascinated with that part of it, and actually started collecting mentors myself along the way. And all of them also knew how to sell. And I realized, as you said, Gary Halbert coined it, or I forget who coined it. It was salesmanship in print. It was being a salesman, but it was doing it in print. It's all about, like I said, finding the right kind of audience, getting them the right kind of message, and using writing. If you're gonna be on video talking, you still need a script, or you need talking notes. If you're going to do any medium at all, I grew up with newspaper ads and direct mail. That was my specialty. That has now morphed into online stuff, but it's still all the same principles. Email is not that different than a direct mail letter. And video sales letters are not very much different at all than a full page advertisement in a magazine or a newspaper or on TV. I was one of the first to start writing for the what became infomercials. Did that back in the 80s, and just watched in wonder how everything I had learned, it no longer mattered about sending direct mail. Once email came out, it no longer mattered about taking out ads in magazines when the magazines and newspapers started going away. And television, late night advertising morphed into everything online. And it's no different. It's the technical details can change, but everything else is standard. What we call clickbait and things like that, that's all standard, ancient direct response tactics taken to a different level, of course. And your audiences change now. Now all audiences are global. There's massive numbers of people out there, and so knowing how to do all of this still matters greatly. You can't just throw your message out there and expect the world to bow down and buy it. It's still all about salesmanship, which is persuasion. And I forgot what else you were asking me,
No,
so
no,
I'll
it
give it
actually
back to
brings
you.
me into something I would like to point out to the audience that I really related to when I heard about your story, which is whenever I was about 16 years old, I kind of had a bit of an existential crisis to like, oh my gosh, adults are like paying for all this stuff. Like, how do you guys afford to live? Like,
Yeah.
and then just figuring out you got to go out there and learn about how business works. So I started studying, at the time I started studying guys like Frank Kern. I started studying the OG internet marketing guys, some of the people that came after them, but they all mentioned people like you, like John
Mhm.
Carlton, like Gary Halbert. And so my point that I want to make to the audience before I ask this question is just like what John did, that commitment to dive in and learn the information, we think that's so we can catch up. But really, that's what puts us the furthest ahead than
Yeah.
anybody else. Because most people, like you said, don't dive into the pool like that. They have one little bit of success and they think, nothing can touch them. Right. And so I just think it's so important to point that out in your story. And so my question that kind of arose was you were in the sort of Madison Avenue branding sphere. Who was that first person that got you into the direct response world? Was it Jay Abraham, Gary? Who was that?
No, I probably misexplained it. I entered as a direct
Oh, you
response
entered.
writer.
Yeah.
So I went to some of these agencies, and I was in the Los Angeles County, so there was a lot of uh, uh, agencies there. At the time, they all collapsed within a decade. But at that time, I did this in the early 1980s. Ogilvy and Mather and several other large New York, Madison Avenue type agencies opened direct response agencies in Los Angeles. So I started out as a direct response guy. I had come the job I had lost when I lost my girlfriend in my house and my house and everything else was a direct response company. It was a computer supply catalog in the early 80s. Now, this is before the web, before personal computers, but we sold computer supplies to people with mainframes, very large computers. And I was in the art department. So I met my first copywriter there who had to write the copy for how to sell these cables. And I was a pay stub artist, and I was actually doing some writing because I would get overwritten captions for a picture or for a photo, or the headline wouldn't fit because I had to work, I had to get hot type, which was, and I'd cut it, put wax on the back, put it on this board. I'm using a T square and I'm doing all this, and I had to cut headlines physically to make them fit. And so I realized very quickly how that writing got done. What I had never met was a freelance writer, one who went from job to job to job. So yeah, when I was working there, so what the names wouldn't mean anything to you. The guys I was working with in that computer supply catalog, and we were pressed. We had impossible deadlines, and we'd spend a week before the final publication of the catalog staying up until midnight. It'd be midnight. I'd be there pasting up stuff and trying to get it in because we had a print date in Memphis, Tennessee, which is where the one of the last of the big printers that these printers were a block long and half a block wide, and they took up 2 or 3 blocks of stuff, and it would just print these catalogs off. And it was quite an amazing thing to see. It's part of the old world. They still exist, but of course their jobs are much less because there's less magazines and less things to print right now, but they're still an essential part of civilization. But watching these guys work in direct response, knowing that I picked up a few things like features and benefits and the importance of making the sale at the point of contact and those several things. So I actually went into advertising thinking that direct response was the most logical way to go about it. So I've probably written a slogan here or there, but only as a side thing to something I was doing. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
even Ogilvy and them, Ogilvy explicitly started saying like direct response is the way to go.
yes.
Like these Madison Avenue guys don't know what they're doing, and so I was just very curious what your first kind of introduction to direct response was. So that's really cool. Now, one of the things that is fascinating is the evolution of the mediums that we use and how we use them. So I went and bought, and I recommend anyone who's serious about really studying great ads, go buy John Carlton's best ads. He sells them on his website. Go check them out. It's worth the investment. But I was so fascinated with the way that you would use, big bold red text and then bold subheadings and all these kind of things. And then I found out later in life that you're colorblind, are you not?
Yes.
So
Green, colorblind.
how did you utilize such imagery, or I guess you could call it imagery, but that type of typeface where it's big bold headlines that are breaking up the paragraphs? Where did you perfect and learn that skill?
Um, it's old school stuff. If you look at old actual ads, for me, I don't know if people will find this offensive or not, but one of the best magazines to look at old school or OG ads, including direct response ads and the mainstream Madison Avenue type ads, go get a stack of Playboys from the late 50s and all through the 60s and into the 70s. The best advertisers, including Ogilvy and Mather and all of those guys, were advertising. That was the biggest selling magazine of that time period. Um, of that sort. It was people dumped money into the place, and a lot of them took out these full page ads. So other places would be like Newsweek or something, but just you can go to antique stores and pick up stacks of magazines from the 60s from certain time periods. People used to keep them. That was the thing. When you had a subscription to National Geographic or something, you would keep all of them.
Yeah, it's a
So
collection.
when it's people have boxes of this stuff in their house, and that's something that's no longer done very much. So they're now antiques. Anyway, the influence of using bold headlines, a lot of italic and italic bold and things like
Yeah.
that. It's there's actually a I don't know a school of design thought around this. And if you look at the classic ads, then you see that they use things to, it's the headline is to get attention. The copy has to be read. And as far as my ads, I invented a lot of that stuff. I mean, maybe somebody else was using it or they were doing it at the same time, but like the use of ellipses, the three dots
Yeah.
after something, I would break up paragraphs. I started learning, especially online. Now, when you're writing print ads or for mailed ads, you have to bunch the copy together. So we'd have long paragraphs because space was an issue.
Uh,
You couldn't go over the amount of you couldn't go lower than a 12-point type because then you're hurting your sales because people can't read it. And you couldn't go longer than could fit on the page because the newspaper doesn't give you an extra bit on the next page if you go over. It's just, and if you don't get the thing there on time, they'll run a blank page and you'll still pay for it. So when the web opened up as a viable marketing medium, I saw it as a way to expand my writing and started spacing out my writing. So I used to have 3 and 4 sentence paragraphs. Then I went back to no more than one sentence to a paragraph. And a lot of times I would break up even a moderate sentence to another paragraph, end with an ellipsis, start with another ellipsis, and work that way in, using the ellipses as a pause, just a kind of a break in the action, so I could have longer sentences, tie things together, and make my points that way. Have single word paragraphs. What a luxury that was to finally get there because there's and then not just these very short paragraphs that make a profound point, but bold and underline it and italicize it. Use that stuff. You can't go wild. You have to have an artist eye about what looks good to the reader's eyeballs as they're reading, as they're taking in this information. So I carefully crafted back in my early days as a writer a readable kind of design. And I had a lot of arguments with designers. Usually I would turn in a manuscript, like, I don't know, 3 pages would equal a 3 page manuscript typed would equal a 1 page ad in a magazine or newspaper, usually about that. So I would turn in my 3 pages, or I was writing direct mail that would go up to 24 printed pages, which was 50 manuscript pages. So I was turning this stuff in. Then I'd have to go argue with the designer who wanted gray floating blocks of type within her brilliant design that was going to. And so I had arguments, and I started winning those arguments because the results came back. Results because it was direct response. If the ad didn't sell, it wasn't good, and it didn't matter how good it looked or how well it read or anything. So all of my stuff was aimed at catching attention, keeping it, and moving them. We call it the grease slide theory. That goes back to the 1920s even, I think they talked about it. You want the reader to get onto your ad up at the top with something that kind of startles him, get him on a grease slide where he can't stop once he's on. It just zooms him down to the end where he sits there with a smoking credit card wondering what the hell just happened. And it's very hard to get people to buy something. You are the stubbornness and skepticism in an average human being is astronomical. It's unbelievable how skeptical and resistant to buying even something they need and want and have been looking for, and they still will resist. People are horrified at the thought of being taken or conned into something. And the psychology of salesmanship is very, very fascinating. And that's why I say salesmen generally lead better lives, unless they're sociopaths to begin with.
Yeah.
But salesmen have to understand humans in a deep psychological way because they have to understand the process that's going on when someone is this, when you get them, you take a prospect, they're cold, they're warm, they could even be hot, but you get them up to a point where they're still on the fence, and then you got to knock them off the fence, meaning they are there. They say, "Well, that's a really good argument you got there. I love the idea of the product, and I probably will buy this, but I'm not sure how I want it right now." Direct response, you have to knock them off the fence into, "Yes, I want this now. I absolutely cannot live another day without having this. I don't want to miss this deal. I don't want to be one of the people that's, had this opportunity and let it go and and regret it for the rest of their lives." So all of this psychology stuff comes in and you understand people at a deeper level. And what's interesting is you understand the flaws of people, you understand the vulnerabilities, you understand again the resistance and the stubbornness and all of that. And in the end, you wind up loving people more for all of that because we can be a lovable species when we're not totally misbehaving, but salesmen understand humans at a level that most humans don't understand themselves at. And for me, that's part of leading an examined life, as I think it was Socrates said, the only life worth living is the examined life.
Yeah.
So, it kind of goes deep. People scoff at advertising. They turn their nose up at it, and the idea of selling makes a lot of new entrepreneurs kind of sick to their stomach there
Oh
because
yeah.
their idea of selling is bad people selling bad products and conning people and stuff. And it's just I have to constantly make new entrepreneurs understand, no, if you have a product that's worthwhile and is going to impact your prospect's life positively, then shame on you if you don't do everything you have in your toolkit to get them to buy, including you're putting all the onus on you so that the refunds are easy, guaranteed that they get their money back. All of this stuff comes in to taking the risk of buying this thing from the prospect and back onto you, the seller,
Yeah.
in an ethical way, selling ethical products that actually work and help people. And advertisers, they can change people's lives. I mean, all prospects in all markets are at some level of trauma. Trauma may be very little. I talk about a guy putting together a playhouse for his young daughter out back, and he runs out of nails. Until he gets more wood nails, he can't finish this, and he's got an unhappy daughter, and his life is not good at that point. If you come along and you have an easy, quick way to get the right kind of nail into his hands quickly, you affect his life. At the higher levels of trauma, you're talking about people with serious, possibly health issues, something where they just don't, you're supplying information to them and offering alternatives or options to them that they might never find, even from their own doctor. And in between is all the other levels of trauma that people have. So you're helping people and changing lives. So
Absolutely.
that's very rewarding. So
And when it comes down to music and musicians, I mean, I can just speak for myself in this, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, John, which is music is some of the most positively beneficial things that you could have in your life. And so having that as something that is your quote unquote product, that you're getting into people's hands to make their life better. I would say most musicians need to feel that responsibility to get their materials out there and into their hands, because I've had someone comment, it was one person that commented on one of my videos that my song was what they needed to hear at their at that point in their life that helped them move forward. And like, as a writer, as a songwriter and a musician, there's nothing better than that. So I think musicians, like you said, they have the same kind of queasiness, I guess you could say, that new entrepreneurs have about selling, and all the societal programming about, oh no, selling is bad because blah blah blah. But I think you I'm gonna quote you to you for a moment, which is, if you are selling something that you know is not beneficial to someone and you use this, then you deserve to burn in hell forever. you
Yes.
know but if you have something that is providing value to people's lives, then yeah, like you said, like you just said, shame on you if you don't do everything you can. So I'm very curious though, because you talked about how you pioneered a lot of these kind of design ways of approaching copy. And so, how have you, like, for example, the ellipses? I love using the ellipses in my own marketing, but when I look at like your email newsletter, it's not as I'm like reckless abandon with my ellipses, so I probably need to chill out. But what modifications or updates would you say that you have made going from, let's say, doing your direct mail magazine ads to email being the medium of consumption? What are the main little adjustments that you've made to make that medium still as effective and still in your own, design that you like?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the censorship that happened in email. It was interesting. It was supposed to free, the web was supposed to free us up, and we could, swear in videos and do all this stuff. But if you send out an email with the wrong word in the subject line, you'll get bounced. So, and it's interesting that email has very strict character counts. It was kind of like when AdWords first came in. You had 15 characters in the head, and then I forget 36 or something in the body. And anyway,
Yeah,
and if you go over, it's just, and you're dealing with different, providers and stuff. So what works in Gmail may not work on other
true.
media. So the idea that's being censored forced me to come up with different kinds of words. We couldn't use the word opportunity for a long time. You couldn't use the word free. Um, uh, yeah, opportunity free. The word business was bad for a while. There was just people went nuts, and it was because the censors weren't business people. They didn't understand what was going on. So, but otherwise, I haven't really felt any um, or too much of a change,
Okay.
except trying to keep it brief and understanding that the attention span has been affected. I mean, back in the 90s when I wrote most of my ads that are now kind of infamous or famous, notorious, probably a better word. Uh, I was able to write 8-page letters for a golf video. We took out 3-page ads of solid copy in Golf Digest, and Golf Magazine, two of the largest magazines, monthly magazines in the world. And we held people's attention, and we wrote. There were no photographs at first. We later started putting a single photograph in towards the top. Um, but I was constricted by the amount of space I had because I could go on even longer. And usually what we do is we test those ads in direct mail first to a house list. And my letters were never less than 8 pages, front and back. No, 4 pages front and back, so 8 pages total. Which I had to trim to get into even a 3-page ad in Golf Magazine. So I'm used to dealing with restrictions. I'm used to dealing with censorship. And the attention span thing was probably the hardest.
Yeah.
So the shortness of the subject line, which has to serve the job of a headline, Once you get them into the email, then you can expand a little bit more and do things. But also, you got to keep the paragraph short. You have to. I still believe you have to get. I haven't A/B tested, split tested this, but you do have to get the link if you're going to link them somewhere up high into the copy, even before you're ready to do it in a salesmanship kind of way. You say, hey, if you're interested right now, pop over here, the blue highlighted link. But wait, first I want to tell you, get back into it. And you got to put the link in there at least 3 times and things like that. So you have to be cognizant of the medium you're in.
Yeah.
But it's really a minor thing. And you can work from formats. Just the idea of, I'll try to get this done in the subject line. Just get them into the email. I'll do some friendly banter here. I'll try to get the link in here. I'll expand on what I'm talking about. I'll start pushing down here. I'll get the link in again, and then kind of finish up with a rude elbow in the ribs to buy now, and then have a PS, which not everybody does, but PSs were standard in direct mail and in direct response ads in newspapers. I brought them uh, to email. A lot of people weren't using them because a PS, people don't even know what a PS is now because they don't get letters. They've never written a letter in their life. They've never gotten a letter in their life. They don't understand the whole format. It's why, Dear Dax, and then you write, and then sincerely or whatever, a little tagline, and then the signature of the person you were dealing with, and then a PS, which means postscript, which means after the writing, and the PS carries a lot of weight in direct response because in direct mail, we did find that people would often read the headline, turn the whole page, the whole thing over,
Mhm.
no matter how many pages it was, to read who it was from and the PS. So sometimes the PS was read right after the headline.
Interesting.
That's not the case in
Scrolling.
email. People don't scroll down now.
Yeah.
So the PS now becomes a last elbow in the ribs again to get the thing, or usually I start my PSs with one more thing. I almost forgot. This is, guaranteed, or this is whatever, supported by this or whatever. And you got a short little thing. It's a last chance to get the link in and to do things. And people are kind of startled by PSs in email. Everyone uses it now. I'm happy to see, or the smart marketers use them. I'm very happy to see. So,
I started using it after I saw you using it really frequently, and I also a few years ago from Frank Kern, and I'm almost wondering if he got this from you, which
everything Frank knows about advertising he got from me. He,
oh
he hasn't admitted that lately. He used to admit it all the time. So
well, I'm gonna send this to him so that we can get it. No, I'm just kidding. Get it
I
out on
don't
the
care.
table.
We're buds. We're buds. I've hung out with him a lot.
Oh yeah. So I'm curious, did he get the idea? I've heard him say that in the postscript, yes, that's where we're gonna repitch, but he definitely leans more on the like urgency and scarcity in the postscript. Is that sort of what you're getting at with that? With that last little elbow to the ribs?
If you're using scarcity and urgency, that's not always the case with a lot of things. And what has ruined a lot of direct response is how popular it's become on the web.
Uh,
When I became a freelancer, there were zero books printed anywhere about freelancing as a copywriter. There were very few books on copywriting itself. There was only a handful of books on direct response copywriting, one of which was Claude Hopkins, of course. And now it's it seems to have surpassed standard advertising. A lot of people don't even realize they're doing direct response when they ask for the sale, when they use a lot of things like urgency, scarcity, things like that. But there's a laundry list in any book you read about direct response advertising or just good advertising in general, you will bring these things up. And it's just a little list that you can go through. In your early days, you can have AI download it for you. You know, AI, what's the top 10 or the top 20 things I should remember when writing a good direct response ad. And it'll give you whatever, a good starting point at least. So all these things are in there.
Yeah.
But the problem is that a lot of, the things that have worked online, like what started with banner ads and things, what was that one ad? One trick, one weird trick doctors don't know, want you to know, or things that comes from ancient direct response. It worked kind of well. I think there was one with a banana that did that stuff, and then people pick it up, because it's online, everybody knows about it, and it starts going. So direct response has begun to eat itself, like the Oribus, whatever you call the snake that
Or a
eats its
horse.
own tail. Um, and so they're making a lot of this stuff. It's like blasting out a sign. We are a scam. This is a total con. Whereas the tactics are innocent enough. So having scarcity, you can have real scarcity, and it can be anything from we're going to pull this price in 2 weeks, and I'm sorry, but if you come back to me in 2 weeks and one day or 1 hour, it's not going to be there, and that's just the way it is, which is um, you know, believable because that's how business work, but it's not real. But there is real scarcity too. I only have 10 of these. I have 10 of these because they're ancient, and I found the last 10 of the Gutenberg Bibles, and they're for sale $1,000 each or whatever. There aren't any more. You can get copies and things like that, but to own an original, there's only 10. And that's real scarcity. And it's how much you can pound it out.
Yeah.
Making up scarcity, making up urgency, things like that, it can bite you in the ass. Uh, but there are other ways to do it. But when you understand salesmanship, and that's been my job as a guru my entire career, is if you understand what's going on with the psychology of the prospect, what's behind the reason you're using these influence tactics, is to make a sale, to address the issues with the prospect, to bring up the fact that things aren't good in your life right now and amplify that, and then say, I can make it better, and here's how, and move on from there. All of this requires some deft human to human understanding. And that's of course why AI will never quite be the beast that people are afraid it's going to be. I've used AI. I like it. It's a great research tool.
I was about to say,
Um,
how do you use AI, John? That was going to be one of my questions because I'm like, you're considered one of the world's greatest living copywriters, and if you're using AI, that's a pretty strong vindication of it. So how do you utilize it?
Usually as research. So when I sit down to do an ad, little in the old days, let's say in the 90s or in the early 2000s, I would, for to do a big piece, I'd set aside a month. Now I'd dawdle for the first couple of weeks, but I'd kind of read up on stuff, interview people, do things, gather my materials, write 100 bullets, try out different headlines, do stuff like this, and get going, and then get to the writing part. And I would actually craft these 20-page mailed letters in pieces. I'd start with the opening, then I'd go to the actually the end, some of them write maybe the PS, then usually write the bullets first, but they'd be floating in the middle of the manuscript. And then I'd kind of put everything together and tie it all together. In doing this, I'm going over the checklists that I just talked about that are already in my head. It's just part of my DNA now, so I don't check it. So now, for me to ask AI to do I very carefully prompt it to. I use GPT mostly, but I also have Claude, and I've looked at a lot of others, and I have colleagues who are deep into this shit. I will carefully ask them to write something and put it all into the prompt. I'm writing to a certain kind of person in a certain kind of market who needs a certain kind of product. Here's what we're going to do. And they just blast it out. And it will blast out copy that is on a scale of 1 to 10, a 3 or a 4, which for a lot of people's purposes can be enough. That can be okay. But if you've got a lot of competition, you got stuff going on, you got to up the ante. I always strive for 9 or 10 in what I've written in my career.
Yeah.
So, but that 3 or 4 level piece of copy that AI will spit out will have some of the elements of things I might have forgotten, or I'll make notes. Oh, that's pretty interesting. That's a nice little tactic. Blah blah blah. I will usually X out 60% of what it wrote. Another 20% will be just outright false hallucination and a lot of stuff. But I can go back and I can ask it, take out the hallucinations, take this out. This is wrong. Please correct it, and force it to get going. And I can spend a lot of time. The advantage, though, of being a real copywriter, a real salesman, is that I know when AI is screwing up, and it does screw up. When I realize it is mimicking human to human action, and when what is really needed is some actual honest empathy and some real understanding of how one human knows another, what another human is going through, what's happening. So AI can only dance around empathy, which is the biggest thing that writers have in bucket loads, the good writers,
Yeah.
that AI doesn't have at all. It's mimicking it. It's a robot mimicking empathy, and people pick up on it, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, AI as a research tool, as a shortcut to getting to that first draft. It would take me, weeks to get to a first draft sometimes. Now I can have AI blast out a first draft, and then even though I don't use anything that the AI did, I have something visual in front of me that I can look at, that I can say, well, okay, that's a botched headline, but there is a nugget of a good hook in there, and the opening is ridiculous, but it's interesting that I can translate what AI is doing here. It's trying to do empathy, or empathy would work here, or it's trying to sell here. It's trying to use urgency or scarcity, or any of the top hot buttons. Then I can go back and ask it again. Use, this product will only be available for 10 days. Rewrite what you just did, and take out the hallucinations, and it'll try again. And sometimes it will come up with stuff, but I never use, I'll tell you the story. The first thing I did with Claude, or with Chat GPT, this is a year and a half ago or so, I think. Um, I asked it to do my obituary, and it came back in 5 seconds. It came back, and I was very astonished. It was full of misinformation and incorrect information. I laughed. I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. So then I said, please redo this. You've got a lot of wrong stuff in here. And the next one that came back is the one where my business partner Stan is going to use when I kick the bucket. It was spot on. It only took 2 drafts of the thing, but that was not trying to sell anything. That was not a high piece of literature. That was just collecting information about me in a 4 paragraph obituary. Oh, excuse me. So I thought that was very interesting, because I was kind of smug, thinking, okay, and then it came back and it corrected it. So you have to understand, my colleague Kevin Rogers, who mentored under me and is a top copywriter and runs Copy Chief. And I'm doing a podcast with him and a guy from Australia right now. Um, he has he has been into AI, and he has an idea about having a relationship with it, which I think is a very, very good idea. Now that AI can remember your previous prompts,
Mhm.
even I think days later, maybe it's an infinite amount of time later, you can go back and it can say, "Hey, remember we were talking about this? Now I want this, this, or this," and you can treat it like a human being who is flawed, or a sentient being, let's say, so
Yeah.
a being that thinks and has its own agency. And then that's an interesting way to go about it, to get there, especially if it's remembering what happened before. So that's an advantage, and that's where they should build on it. It's kind of like what was that movie with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson? Her, I think
Oh yeah.
she was an AI voice, and he fell in love with her, and of course, it all goes bad. But this was done like 2015 or something, I think. So, it's interesting to think about this. But the idea of a relationship with AI is something you should think about as a slightly or as a seriously flawed assistant that can do research for you and do things, but you got to watch it like a hawk, and it will miss a lot of things. So that's a good way to approach AI.
And I think something that you pointed out is really important, which is you understand the reasons for the implementation of the tactic. See, like a lot of writers' mistake is that, like we were talking about urgency and scarcity. They know that it's a powerful technique, and so they think, okay, it's like a checklist. I have to have some urgency and scarcity,
Exactly.
as opposed to what you were saying, which is having an extreme empathy to where when someone is going to have a concern pop up that needs to be addressed with urgency and scarcity, as opposed to just using it as a sort of plug into all my sales letters things. And so with AI, you're able to discern those things because you're understanding the psychology, like, oh, okay, they don't need this manufactured empathy. They need some genuine empathy here and all this kind of stuff. And I know we have just a couple more minutes here, so I have tons more questions that I'd love to ask you, but something that I'm personally extremely interested in, just because whenever I started studying business and entrepreneurship, you were one of the first 10 or so people that I really started diving into. And I've always kind of had this, it's weird. I have like a nostalgic longing for a genre or a generation that I was never a part of. I'm 29 now. And so I was never around when seminars, for example, really started kicking off. And you and Gary are sort of credited to pioneering the modern marketing seminar. That's correct, right?
Yes.
And so my question for you is, could you take us back for just a moment and kind of describe what it was like in the late 70s, 80s, starting this like seminar stuff and what it's like hanging around in a room with Gary and trying to figure out how you're going to do this? What was that like?
Chaos. The the one big breakthrough we had was hot seats, and I'll explain hot seats really quick. Hot seats was where we would just take someone from the audience, a rando, just somebody, you come up here. What's your business? What's your big problem? And then we'd fix it for them. We'd fix their problem, tell them everything they needed to do. And we did that because at the first big seminar that Gary and I produced. Um, it was called the Century Seminar of the Century, I think, and I believe his sons are still selling parts of it. I'm not anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Halbert's site is still up, run by his sons Bond and Kevin, who are I'm very close to. We had a 3-day seminar called whatever it was. And it was huge. We charged people 7 grand in 1988, I believe, which was like 20 grand now. um, and people came expecting a lot. And he had a refund period on the second day, Saturday. So we had all day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. So after Friday, I think the refund period was at noon on Saturday. And going to lunch in the elevator with Gary, Gary turns to me and says, "What do you think we ought to do with the rest of this seminar?" I said, "What are you talking about? I thought you had this planned out." He says, "Nope, I only had a plan to the guarantee period. Now I don't know what we're going to do when we come back from lunch." We had a huge seating audience, and we had not necessarily won the audience over yet, but we had got them through the guarantee period. They were happy enough with what was happening. So Jay Abraham was with us, and Jay Abraham had a bit of a reputation of flaking on, of being hired like by an insurance company to come over and talk to his people to the agents and stuff, and he'd get kind of tired or bored or something. He said, I don't know. But what he started doing was he's saying, I would just take one guy and say, what's your problem? Let's solve that. And he didn't call them hot seats or anything. He just was doing that. And we said we can use Jay's thing on stage and maybe pluck somebody out of the audience. This had never been done before. Very risky. We didn't, we had no control over what these people were like, what their business problems were. And all of us had done a lot of consulting at that time with business people, and we knew how to solve the problems we had been presented with up to that point. We did not know what these people were going to present.
Yeah.
So Jay and um, Gary and I and a couple of other people, I think Sam Fishbein and somebody else, we were on stage and we just said, we're going to do some hot seats. A hot seat is where you're in the hot seat and it's your show, and we're going to hear you out what your biggest problems are, and we're going to solve them. And because we were needed a lot of time, Gary was packing a lot of theater into this. So we'd stretch these out to an hour or so, when in reality, all three of us had the answer to the guy's situation before he was finished explaining it,
Yeah.
usually. So Gary and I started throwing hot seat seminars in Florida when he had moved to Florida at this time. The first one was in Los Angeles, and he moved down the Keys. He started in Vaca Key in the center. We wound up down in Key West eventually, where he settled for several years. So we'd have these Key West hot seat seminars. We'd have 40 people in the room. We'd start on Friday afternoon, work through Saturday and Sunday, and then it'd be done. And we get everybody had their chance in the hot seat, and we would solve their problems. And Gary got to tell stories and stuff. And actually, it got kind of boring. But the realization I had was that once you've been in business for a while, especially if you're doing consulting, you really can solve most problems. I wrote a book with Dean Jackson, who is a good friend of Kern, um, called "There Are Only." Oh, I'm going to forget this. There are only three parenthesis or four parenthesis marketing problems or marketing solutions in the entire universe, and here they are. And it was a book that we wrote. It was me and a transcription of me and Dean just talking out the three or four things. There aren't that many answers or solutions to every marketing problem out there. Knowing the right one and the nuances of it, and especially what the consequences of it are going to be, is huge. But I realized that at the point I left working with Gary, we were best friends until he died, but I stopped working with him in the early 90s. And then around 2002, I think I started giving my own hot seat seminars, and I'd have people come in and I'd just solve everybody's problems, either copy or business wise. And it was very, very easy. So that hot seat thing then got picked up, and almost everyone calls them hot seats and does them in these events, but they don't know what they're doing. And I've been in the room when several gurus have tried their own hot seats, and they just botch it horribly. Because they don't listen. You listen very carefully. What's your business and what's your problem? What would you like us to pay attention to? That's how you start a hot seat. And if you skip that, then the person describing his problem will wander everywhere. And the one thing that, of course, you learn as a consultant is what he thinks the problem is not the real problem. Almost 90% of the time, that's the situation. So once you know that, then you know how to dig. You also get into when I was giving my hot seat seminars, every third hot seat turned out to be a personal problem. The guy was getting divorced. There was an embezzler. His partner was cheating him. Um, uh, there was somebody who was unhappy in the business, who was sabotaging the business. Somebody was getting ready or already working with competition. And a lot of people aren't aware of their competition. Um, and things like that. So it was very interesting that every third one had nothing to do with sales or anything else. It was an unhappiness with the entrepreneurial position, A lot of entrepreneurs love being an entrepreneur in that first rush of bringing it up here, and then they got to become a manager. They got to hire people, and they're no longer doing the fun stuff of entrepreneurialism. They are managing a business, and that bores the hell out of them, and they will self-sabotage, and a lot of this stuff happens. So it's very fun. I've been a student of human psychology my entire career, and love being able to air it out every once in a while. And I see that we're out of time. That
Yeah.
was a fun uh, interview. I appreciate the questions. They were very spot on.
Well,
I'm
thank you.
losing my voice, so
No
we're
worries.
gonna have to
I
wrap this up.
appreciate you so much for being here with us, and I definitely want to respect your time. Before we wrap and bring everything to a close, if you had one final thing to say to all the musicians out there that are trying to become more entrepreneurial, if you had one final closing thing to leave them with, what would you say?
Musicianship is a limited thing in your life. You will always love music, but I would record as much of the stuff you're doing now as you can. Um, Arthritis happens. A lot of other things happen. So, if you're at your peak, if you're rocking and rolling right now, take advantage of it and share that enthusiasm with other people. The biggest problem with the biggest lists available of prospects is what Thoreau called the quiet desperation of the average man. I forget the quote. Uh,
Most men lead lives of
well,
quiet desperation, right?
yes, quiet desperation. And, people are lonely, and you can provide a community for them to be part of. People feel isolated, not just lonely, but isolated. And you can provide a peek behind the curtains of where whatever you're doing. People don't have access to actual inside information and stuff, and you can give that to them in a way that they understand. When I picked apart songs from my bands in high school, we had to listen to a record. So we'd put the arm down on the record, listen to about two go arounds, pick it back up, try to pick it out, and make sure we're in the key and tuned. And now you can go on a dozen different apps, and there's lyric. A lot of time the lyrics are wrong, by the way, the old songs, which I find hilarious. But you can get the chords. You can actually get the hooks printed out in Tab, because I don't read music, but so Tab's really easy. Um, so but still being led through this. If you've been in bands, for example. One of the things I used to do when I wrote a lot for guitar and music people selling some of the first stuff online. And one of the early advantages I had was how bands operate, how the flakiest person in the band is going to be the keyboard player because he's probably got the most education and he feels above you and he's going to stop showing up to gigs. The biggest electronics guy is going to be the bass player. For some reason, they just understand if the PA goes down, the bass player is going to know how to, shortcut a fuse
True
and
in
do
my
it right. Uh, the friendliest guy you're going to have is the drummer because the drummer supports everything. He's like the father figure. The biggest damage you can do to a band, and I'm going to take heat for this, but it's true. If you're an all male band, you bring a chick in, my old drummer, the worst thing he could say about somebody was he'd make some allusion to chick singers because he'd been stranded in the wilds of Canada by a woman singer in his band who took the bass player and the PA and split to go start their own thing, which collapsed. And he was stuck with the keyboard player, and they had to work their way, a drummer and a keyboard player, work their way across Canada. It was hilarious.
Oh man.
But it's just you understand all these things. But that kind of experience first is hilarious, and it gives people an insight into a world, especially even playing biker bars and stuff, because that's what I did. I learned a lot about life from biker bars. I never wanted to get beyond the skills needed to make bikers dance when they're drunk, which meant I never wanted to record. I didn't want a recording contract. I didn't want any of that stuff. I didn't want to learn how to play like Dwayne Allman. I played good enough to really wow the bikers, and that was it. But the lessons I learned, the stories I'm able to tell, the essence of the experience is what I can infuse all of my advertising with. So if you're a musician, live large. Everyone should live large anyway. We only get one shot, at this life, one ticket, and it's canceled way too early. And I tell you that as an old man who has lived very hard, through 70 plus years. And it's if you're looking for the essential secret sauce of being a great marketer, it is living a well-lived life, varied life. Um, you know, stay if you're an alcoholic, stay away from booze. If you tend to be an addict, stay away from the drugs and stuff. If you're an idiot about romance, at least give it a few years before you propose. And think about what you can't live without. If the fire's coming and it's a block away and you got to go, what are you taking from the house? And if it's your guitar, that's important. If it's your stack of handwritten songs, that's important. But you think about that stuff and think about what the average person has going for them in their life. The average musician, some of the best musicians I've ever met have never taken their talent on the stage. They can't work with other musicians. They're afraid of being less than absolutely perfect. It's like, have you known guys with perfect pitch?
Yeah.
Back in the old days, they couldn't listen to records because if your turntable was just a bit off, they would freak out. And I met a bunch of people with perfect pitch, and I thought this was something that would be great. Instead, it's horrible, and they can't play live because the snare drum is slightly out of tune. It's like I didn't know you could tune snare drums when I was 16, let alone that it mattered, and it's all of this stuff matters to people and music, and we keep comparing ourselves to the wrong people. If you're a musician and you're pretty good and you only compare yourself to Stevie Ray Vaughan or his brother up here with the Fabulous Thunderbirds, um, you're going to come up short. Instead, what is the average guy in your town playing? Go to open mics, see what other people are doing. Go see local bands who aren't opening for the Who when they come into town. So, all of this stuff comes into play, and that's what people hunger for is a connection, a community, a sense of belonging, and a way to, tell them how to make money. Tell them what goes in a gig bag. I had that thing as a bonus. It's gig bags of famous guys who didn't have roadies. What do you put in there? I
Yeah.
still have I haven't played live in 20 years or so, but I was looking in my closet in my man cave, and I still got my gig bag from the last time I played. And it's hilarious what's in there. So
Hell yeah, man. Well, words of wisdom from a living legend. John, thank you so much for being here and helping out the musicians on this stream today. If you guys want to go check out more from John, go to john-carlton.com. You can also go to marketingrebel.com. I recommend picking up one of John's products, which is his best ads, but he's got some other great things there if you want to really dive in and learn the skill of copywriting. Thanks again, John. We really appreciate it, man.
that was